Welcome to episode 10 of the Seed Growers Podcast. I'm Dan Brisebois, seed grower at Tournesol Cooperative Farm and spreadsheet and crop planning enthusiast. With the Seed Growers Podcast, I want you to get inspired to go out and save some seed on your farm. This is the last episode of season 1 of the Seed Growers Podcast. You can tell me your thoughts about the podcast and what you want for season 2 by clicking on the survey link in the show notes and answering a few questions. I would really love to hear from you. Chris Bolden-Newsome and Owen Taylor are this episode's guests. Chris and Owen are the founders of Truelove Seeds in Philadelphia, a farm-based seed company offering culturally important seeds grown by more than 70 small-scale urban and rural farmers. Chris is also a market grower, seed keeper, and educator at Sankofa Community Farm at Bartram's Garden. In this episode, Chris and Owen discuss their seed stories and how they came to be seed keepers. They talk about Truelove's network of seed growers and how Truelove aims to support people to grow seeds for culturally important crops in a way that is financially meaningful. They also talk about the difference between technique and technology in seed harvest and seed cleaning. For this episode's technical section, Chris talks about keeping Crowder pea seeds, how they grow dedicated rows for seed separate from those intended for food, how they harvest repeatedly over the season, and how they sit together to shell Crowder peas in a circle, singing traditional songs, telling stories, or shooting the breeze. Owen talks about keeping cucuzza seed, an African bottle gourd grown in southern Italy. The Truelove team grows the cucuzza seed along the fence line and harvests the fruit when the stem turns brown, and then they jump on the fruit when it's time to extract the seed. This episode is sponsored by the Organic Seed Alliance. Organic Seed Alliance is a U.S.-based nonprofit that advances ethical seed solutions to meet food and farming needs in a changing world. OSA's work ensures an abundant and diverse supply of ecologically grown seed, tended in perpetuity by skilled and diverse communities of seed stewards. To advance this mission, we serve growers working with seed at any scale through participatory research, practical education, policy advocacy, and network development. Join our online seed community at organicseedcommons.org, search our resources at seedalliance.org, and read recommendations for advancing organic seed at stateoforganicseed.org. On a personal note, I also want to mention the Organic Seed Conference that OSA puts on every 2 years. I first went in 2008, and I learned so much about growing seed and the business of seed during the conference, and met so many seed growers, breeders, and seed companies. It was the single most influential and formative experience in my seed growing career. If you're serious about seed, you should give it a try. This episode is also sponsored by the Bauta Family Initiative on Canadian Seed Security. Seedheads is the cross-pollinating podcast where Canadian seed heroes tell their stories, share their how-to tips, and talk about the seeds they love. Join Steph Benoit and Hugo Martorell as they host conversations that are both technically useful and personally inspiring, as guests share the myriad ways that seeds are at the center of our lives as growers and eaters. If you're interested in hearing from people who are passionate about saving, stewarding, and sharing seed, subscribe to Seedheads in your favorite podcast app, or go to seedsecurity.ca/podcast and get started with seasons 1 and 2 of Seedheads today. Seedheads is a podcast inspired by Canadian seed growers and hosted by the Bauta Family Initiative on Canadian Seed Security, a program of seed change. Season 3 is coming in 2022, as always, with episodes in French and English. I'm subscribed to the Seedhead podcast, and I can't wait to listen to Season 3. Hi, Chris and Owen. Welcome to the Seed Growers Podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us, and good to be here, Dan.
I'm really excited to have you on because you're both seed growers, but there's also the work you do with Truelove Seeds, running a seed company. You're working with other seed growers, and you're helping so many seed growers getting their seeds out there. So I'm both of those things are really exciting to have on this podcast. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. I thought we could start off by talking about where both of you are farming and what the climate is like in terms of growing seed.
Sure. Yeah. Well, we're both we're married and we live together and farm, though not at the same place. Obviously, here in the same city and state of Pennsylvania, Southeast Pennsylvania to be specific. We are in Philadelphia County and Montgomery County. I think, is that correct? Oh,
Our farm's in Delaware County right
Oh,
now.
you're in Delaware County. Okay, sorry. Yeah, okay, Delaware County. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think we have, the weather is as one could imagine, the typical, hot, very hot in summer. Well, relatively hot in summer, mild to mildly harsh winters sometimes. So I think it's a good space to be growing seeds. Maybe a little humid compared to some places out west.
It is actually pretty difficult compared to a lot of the seed farms, like in the Pacific Northwest, for example, in that, like Chris was saying, the humidity is particularly high. But there's some real benefits to this region for seed production, especially since we work with people from so many different diasporas, different places, subtropical and tropical places, who are keeping their traditional seeds. We're able to grow a lot of these heat-loving, kind of medium to long season plants from places like the Caribbean, or the Middle East, or parts of Africa. While it's a particular challenge for us to figure out how to dry down our seed crops and protect them from the summer rains, which I know people don't get in some other parts of the country, we are able to grow some plants that are very difficult to get seed from in cooler places. So we've got pluses and minuses, and we're always trying to figure out how to dehumidify our seed drying spaces, and we come up with some solutions for that. But yeah, it's both a challenge and a real perk to be in a very hot and humid place like this.
It's like you're farming in a greenhouse always.
Yes, definitely.
And I think my frame of reference is maybe a little bit different. I think of it as humid, but I don't really think of it as an extremely humid space. I think obviously, as Owen was saying, it's gonna depend on the seeds. But I'm a Mississippian, originally. So coming from Mississippi, it does not feel nearly as humid as what I'm still accustomed to. I think of, but I mean, I think Owen is definitely certainly right that I think that because you do have this sort of, you have an interesting sort of variety. We get just enough of all the weather extremes, as opposed to it being sort of consistently hot and humid until it's, a few months of cool, like where I come from, or consistently dry, and then maybe some rain, like in some areas of the West. So yeah, it's a nice mix that I think does allow us, particularly with our mission, growing culturally significant crops, to be able to grow a little bit of something from all over the world.
Would both of you want to share your seed stories, or how you came to start working with seed and how it ultimately came into to be Truelove Seeds, and then how it's going beyond that?
Yes, I've been growing vegetables and a garden since I was a little kid. I was probably 14 in northeastern Connecticut, just as a hobby, and that was in the mid 90s, and I started taking jobs on small organic farms, and just fell in love with it as a beyond just a hobby, into the idea of this could be my living. And but really in the early 2000s, I started working in the food justice and environmental justice movements when I was living in the Bay Area of California, and stayed doing that work for the next 10-15 years in New York and Philly, working with community gardeners, urban farmers, who were kind of transforming these spaces in their neighborhoods that had been abandoned, neglected because of disinvestment and white flight over the last few decades, which is changing now. But when I was getting into this work, there were so many spaces in Black and brown neighborhoods in particular, that were being totally transformed into these gorgeous, spaces for gathering, for growing healthy food. So that was kind of the context for my work, trying to recognize the work that had been done for decades to invigorate these spaces and improve communities, and look to the leadership of mostly elder Black and brown gardeners, and invest in their leadership during kind of something of a gentrification of the quote unquote urban farm movement, recognizing the people that had laid the groundwork for this work. And so, when I moved to Philadelphia after Chris and I got married, I was doing some community organizing around protecting community gardens with the increase in development happening here in Philadelphia. But I needed another job, and I started working with William Moyes Weaver, who I'd never heard of before at the time, but who needed some help in his gardens. And it turned out he found his grandfather's seed collection that was started in 1932 in a deep freezer in the 60s and had been keeping it ever since, 40, 50 years later, and growing it to 4,000 varieties of, heirloom plants, seeds. And so I just fell in love with the work there of preserving these seed varieties that had such deep, interesting histories that could tell you about the movement of people and their foodways and their traditions and so on. And so after 4 years working with him and starting to sell seeds through Roughwood Seed Collection and other companies that were buying from us, like Baker Creek and Hudson Valley Seed Company, I wanted to kind of branch off. And Chris and I had been talking about, the importance of people preserving their own ancestral seeds. And I really was inspired by his work at his farm, Sankofa Community Farm at Bartram's Garden, growing an African diaspora garden. And it kind of all clicked into place with, why don't we work with the people who we are already in relationship with in the food justice movement, who are doing the cultural preservation work through their foodways, through tending to their traditional crops, and to kind of introduce or bring in people who are already doing seed keeping, seed saving with their cultural crops, and help them kind of offer them through a seed company model. And so that's where Truelove Seeds sprouted from, was this idea of kind of acting as a mentor with community-based farms and small farms around identifying and making available people's ancestral and cultural crops to other people in similar diasporas through a seed company model.
Some of our process of how Truelove came about, I can speak from my perspective, as Owen was saying, around cultural preservation. And for me, it's looked a lot like we use this phrase or this word, cultural rematriation, right? So the remothering of our cultural traditions. And for me, that's a very specific sort of context in which that's happening. I am from the Deep South. I am from Mississippi, from Greenville, Mississippi, to be specific, which is kind of the heart of the Delta, the Mississippi Delta area. So that makes me a minority in terms of people from the Southern diaspora, in this part of the country. We don't tend to come east. We tend to go west. So a lot of Black Mississippians, are live in Chicago and California, and points west, Oklahoma, that sort of thing, just sort of how it worked out. So when I got here, I recognized that, I came to the East Coast to go to Howard University, premier Black, university in Washington, D.C. And it was there, I think, that I really realized sort of beautiful diversity of African-American culture, in the United States. Not to mention, of course, African diaspora culture in general, just sort of a larger world of African descended peoples. Because, you had this place in DC where there were just so many different types of Black folks from all over. And I realized that most African Americans in this part of the country come from the East Coast South. So, almost universally, if you talk to Black folks in Philly, their grandmother or great-grandmother will be from South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, and Georgia, maybe a little bit from Florida. And so I think that started to get me to think really about what we had in common as being from sort of, the South writ large, but also how many things, had sort of been lost, left, or abandoned in terms of both cultural practices, wisdom practices, forms of spirituality, and of course, food and foodways. I know that that, the South is a huge place with, lots of diversity. It's not often understood or known by people who aren't Southerners. It's sort of all of the South, at least the impression I get is all sort of the same place, just one big sort of area. And it's really not, but there are some things that we do have in common. And a lot of it is around the food and the crops that are grown, and particularly Black folks, because of the universal condition of slavery for all African Americans in this country in terms of our history. It meant that there were certain foods and crops that were shared throughout the South. And so for me, really, it was about recognizing, first of all, sort of the integrity of the culture that I came from. First of all, recognizing that I came from a very distinct Southern culture, a very distinct Southern and African descended culture as a Black Mississippian, and that came with a host of beautiful food traditions and spiritual traditions and speech and culture in general that I don't think I completely appreciated, and when I did learn to, it was the food that really drew me in. And so the crops that are hard to find, seeds and foods that are hard to find, and that as a consequence have been abandoned in daily use or regular use in the North, particularly in the East Coast North, were the ones that really drew my eye. And I recognized that I had taken for granted the field peas, for instance, very specifically, the crowder pea, which I grew up with, and was as common as anything where I'm from. The butter beans, when I say butter bean, for us, a butter bean is brown and it's speckled, and it's smaller than what I realized folks were talking about when they said butter bean on the East Coast, which is probably something more like a lima bean where I'm from. We would call that a lima bean. So, I think it was just sort of really understanding that there was this kind of common food culture, and that even held a complexity within it that was something that I shared with Black people here. And indeed, once I started to do the research, I recognized that, many Caribbeans grew up eating the same foods or some of the same crops, of course, very differently, different preparation, how they made it, how they seasoned it, how they ate it and when they ate it, but they were oftentimes the same foods, particularly, these peas and the beans, the legumes and the things that sustained us, the greens that were common. I started to recognize, which areas of the country, particularly of the South, had allegiance to very specific types of greens. And greens are, a hallowed sort of a factor within African culture in general, all over the world. We are, according to everything I've read, the most greens eating people on the planet are Black folks. And so, yeah, for me, it was largely these bean crops, these legume crops, and the crowder pea and the purple hull pea, which are the two main beans that I grow. Well, I guess I grow three beans for the catalog currently: crowder pea, purple hull pea, which were both Vigna unguiculata, as well as the brown speckled butter bean, the Mississippi brown speckled butter bean, which is, I believe, Phaseolus lunatus. And so those are the three that I grow because those are near and dear to my heart, because they had very specific meanings. Field peas were eaten throughout the week. That was a common thing that we ate. The crowder pea was probably the most regular and common that I remember. But the purple hull pea was very special, mostly because it was beautiful. It had a pink eye. Looked like a black-eyed pea, but with a pink eye and a white center. And the hull was this, glorious shade of burgundy, deep crimson, almost purple, which is, hence why we call it the purple hull pea. And then there was that butter bean, and the butter bean was more of a special kind of bean. And after growing it on my own, and not just shelling it from my grandmother, I recognized why it was more expensive and less common in terms of how often we ate it. That was more of a Sunday bean. That was a bean that we would eat on Sundays, to my recollection, because the plants, they're bush beans, and then you got to stoop so low to harvest them, and it takes a little bit more time in the process of shelling them. Also, might be a little bit more time consuming, but all of that sort of, I helped to build within, for me, a story that I could then share with and give back to Black folks here, on the East Coast North, that are foods that also come from their heritage as well, even when their ancestors might have prepared them differently.
So right now, Chris, you're growing at Sankofa Community Farm at Bartram's garden?
Yes, Sankofa Community Farm at Bartram.
Sorry, apologize. So you're growing at Sankofa Community Farm at Bartram's garden. And this is where you're doing your seed saving and also growing African crops and African American crops?
Absolutely, yeah. Amongst other market crops, definitely. So we don't just grow only foods, from the African diaspora, but those are sort of the featured crops that we grow at Sankofa amongst, most of your other standard market crops.
And so, in addition to a seed grower, you're also a market farmer.
Oh, yes. Yes, sir. Yeah, market farmer and educator. Our program is an African diaspora-centered and spiritually rooted agricultural project here in Southwest Philadelphia. So yeah, there's a whole package that goes with it, So both Truelove and Sankofa are in the work of not just sort of production, but also of education.
One of the things I love all bioregional seed companies. I just think it's great that people are growing seeds close to where the food is going to be grown and in the same similar kind of climates. But one of the things that just amazes me whenever I read about or see what Truelove is doing is how many growers you're working with. And I think the last time I saw was that 70 plus urban and rural farmers that you're working with, and that whose seed you're gathering, or I wouldn't say seeds gathering, but who you're working with to distribute their seed. Do you want to talk a little bit about this part of Truelove?
Yes, I think it's about 70 growers that we're working with now. We started in 2017 with maybe 12, and they were mostly here in the Philadelphia area at that point. We kind of started by gathering together maybe 5 or 6 Philly farms and for some in-person visioning sessions about what Truelove Seeds could and should become as a way to support the cultural preservation work through seed keeping in these urban and rural spaces. Each year we've grown a little bit because people hear about what we're doing. They see it as a model to really invest in this aspect of kind of food sovereignty work that's often talked about, but often there aren't kind of roadmaps for how to do it, where people say people need access to affordable, healthy, and culturally relevant food. And a lot of times the culturally relevant piece is something that's not focused on as much. And this really was an engine to help fill that out and support people in doing that, and support them in a way that is financially meaningful. I think as people have seen our growth and seen our model and seen all of these amazing varieties that are often hard to find now available to people who truly love them, they want to get involved. We share 50% of our income for any one seed variety back with that producer. So when Sankofa sells, their seeds through us, we send $2 on every $4 packet back to them. And that's pretty unusual for a seed company. I think it's, I kind of looked at some examples from other companies, what they were paying per pound. And a lot of times we're paying per ounce what people pay per pound for seed, because we're sharing such a huge portion of our income back. And so that's been honestly part of what's drawn some people to our company as well. They're seeing that this is a way, like a really cool program for their participants, because we do work with so many farms that have educational and or community elements to it. This is a way for them to become skilled at saving their cultural seeds and share them with people from similar backgrounds and beyond, and earn a meaningful wage for doing that that's outside of like grant cycles and separate from their market sales. So a lot of people have been interested. We've also recruited people who we see doing social justice and cultural preservation work to grow for the catalog. And it's kind of a requirement to be part of our network, is that you grow your own ancestral seeds at least. And so it's definitely a lot of farms to work with. And I over the years, I've been the primary contact for all of them. And so this year we now have like a Google group for all of our growers. We've started in January doing monthly gatherings for all of our growers online and Zoom, so that we can kind of have people meet each other and connect across the network and get some kind of educational programming, but also kind of community space for community support with their seed keeping project. So it's kind of evolving into more and more of a network. So yeah, that's what we, and then throughout the year, people can text, call, email me any questions about their seed crops. It's really a form of mentorship. So we aren't necessarily looking for experienced seed producers. We're looking for people who are invested in cultural preservation through seed keeping, and we offer them, training and mentorship as needed. And a lot of times they are immigrants or refugees who don't need much support because they never lost the practice of keeping their ancestral seeds. But sometimes even those groups need help figuring out how to scale it up to seed production and look at quality control in a different way, since they'll be shared widely through a seed company. So yeah, that's how our model works.
Do they get it to a point where it's pretty clean and then they're sending you this bulk or maybe delivering this bulk seed to you, and then you're maybe doing a final cleaning and then packing it up and distributing it?
Exactly. That's a growing edge for us too, because we do have several growers who will just hand us unprocessed seed. And a lot of times we'll make an exception for them because we value their work so much, and we want to make it as low a bar as possible for them to be able to be part of this network and part of the seed catalog. But we're really trying to figure out how to help all of our growers get the seed as clean as possible before it comes to us, because we spend quite a bit of time cleaning everyone's seeds. There's only a few growers who send us seed clean enough that doesn't need to go through a final cleaning, and those are growers who also sell through other companies and kind of know how to make it ready for packets and ready for germ testing and packets. But for the most part, we'll spend weeks and weeks cleaning all of the seeds that come into us. And actually our coworker Amira, who just recently left to start her own project called Sista Seeds, she was kind of our designated seed cleaning person for the last few years. I'm hoping to find a way to recruit her back over the winter. But she might even start her own seed cleaning business, because she's learned really well how to do these final cleanings. So she may even offer a service to seed growers sometime in the future to do that kind of work. So we're trying to figure out how to make that more streamlined and take less of our time. But again, we're trying to create as low a bar as possible for the community-based farms and culturally rooted farms to be part of the seed company. So we do a lot of final seed cleaning for them.
Are you the only market for some of these people in terms of their seed, or are there many that are selling to other seed companies also?
I would guess that there's only a few people that sell through our catalog that also sell through other.
Yeah, I think that's correct. I think we're probably the only market for most people, for most of the seed growers.
Yeah, there might be 3 or 5 people who've sold things to other companies before. That might even be a stretch.
That sounds like a great network for people to be part of, both a mentorship and then a community of like-minded seed people. There's not all gardeners or farmers are seed growers that they should be. So it sounds like a really great group that you have.
Yeah, it is really special. And the more, like I said, the more that we do these monthly gatherings, and we did a really awesome in-person gathering last fall for people who could make it. The more that we kind of connect across the network, I feel like the more robust and more supportive and more exciting it feels. So I'm really glad about this new direction.
Hey, you all, Farmer Jesse here. The goal of No-Till Growers is to help produce and create valuable niche content like what you're listening to now. We create several different podcasts, from the Winter Growers podcast hosted by Clara Coleman to the Collaborative Farming podcast with host Jackson Roulette and many more. We produce videos at the No-Till Growers YouTube channel, including farm tours and crop-specific breakdowns. And our entire model is to create helpful, valuable farming content that is free and open to the public, so anyone, anywhere can use it. So if you appreciate that and our work, or are simply enjoying this show, please consider signing up to be a patron at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers. There are also other support options at no-tillgrowers.com, or you can even purchase a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, because when you purchase it directly from no-tillgrowers.com specifically, the proceeds go to making you more amazing content like this. Okay, that's my spiel. Thanks, you all. Back to the show.
So every episode, I like to talk shop and really get into the weeds, or into the seeds, I guess, and the technique of seed saving. And so, Chris, you mentioned that you'd like to talk about growing and saving crowder peas for seed.
Yeah, well, so I mean, I think that we were talking earlier about technical practices, of around our seed growing, and it made me nervous because and thinking about technical more as technique rather than technology, because as Owen has said, I think a couple of times, we're very low tech in most of our seed keeping processes, which I do think also is another beautiful invitation and tool for us to sort of lift up this work in a very unique way. The crowder pea, which is a Vigna unguiculata, known in this part of the country as a cow pea, in the cow pea family. I don't like it being called cow peas, for the record, because I was told by a good friend of mine from the north, she's now deceased, Sister Mary Jokum, that when I mentioned to her how much I love black-eyed peas as a kid, and she was a German nun from Illinois, she said, "Black-eyed peas? Oh, we feed those to the cows." And ever since then, I've had a bad taste in my mouth for the idea of them being called cow peas, because we feed them to the babies where I'm from. And so that's the work that that we're doing at Sankofa. I think it's as I said earlier, it's a traditional pea, and it's sort of the common pea. My daddy talks a lot about my dad when he was a day laborer, in Jim Crow, Mississippi in the 60s. As a young man, a kid really, 10 or 11, 12, he would, sort of hire himself out, like most kids in that part of the country and at that time did, to farmers. And they would get up, he would tell me they would get up early in the morning. We say 4-day. And they would all, get on a truck, and they would go and work in some fields in Arkansas or other fields in Mississippi or in Tennessee or nearby places. And they work all day from cane to cane, which is from when you can see the sun to when you can't see the sun. And they would then, but one of his most precious memories, and he would tell me about the pride of moving up from being the hoe sharpener to the water boy, to being able to work out in the fields. But amidst all of that, one of the most exciting sort of memories for him was when it came lunchtime. He would supplement whatever his mother sent with him, which was not much, with a sort of a common meal that they all shared, and that would be fresh peas, fresh crowder peas. And we eat, and it's incidentally too, in the South, and this is sort of universal in the South, traditionally we eat beans and peas fresh, which was something I've learned was pretty much unheard of and unknown when I came to Pennsylvania to a lot of folks in the North. Besides green beans, besides green beans, but in terms of other beans and peas, but we eat them all fresh and only eat dried beans during the winter when you can't get them fresh. And he'd say that they would sort of shell these fresh peas and parch them in over a dry skillet, an outdoor fire, of course, with corn. And just the memory of that meal, sort of takes him back in time. And it's this really beautiful sort of bittersweet sort of remembrance. And so I think about that a lot. I think about this pea that has nourished so many people throughout the South, Black and white, because, a lot of our food traditions cross race in the South. Something else that I think is very different than Northern cultural experiences. We did tend to eat a lot of the same foods, most of the same foods. And there's a whole history and story around that for another time. But growing this pea at our farm has been, a powerful way to sort of reacquaint people to the tradition of eating fresh peas, to the tradition of eating this pea, which originates in Africa. So all of the black-eyed pea tribe comes from Africa originally, and then went out to the world and became different things, right? Went to Asia and became a long bean or a mung bean. Went to Italy and became the Fagiolina di Trasimeno. Went all over the world and did its thing, and settled in the deep South. And so it's one of my privilege and honor to bring this being back. So we grow it on mounds, and that's the traditional way of growing most food in Mississippi, where I'm from. And I only recently learned that is also very much a West African technique. I never thought anything about it. My grandmother would call them hills. Everything she would teach us, how to plant anything or whenever, and God rest her soul, she's been deceased now for almost a decade, but anytime I would ask her about planting and any of our traditional foods, she would always start by saying, you make a hill, right? So you grow on mounds. So we grow these sort of on mounds, in a traditional way. And the wonderful thing about that crop, black-eyed peas in general, and I would say even, foods of African origin just in general, is that they don't need a lot of babying or a lot of, they don't need fine soils to do great work in. To the contrary, they can seem to thrive even in some sort of the roughest soils and roughest sort of situations. So as long as you keep the weeds down while they're young, you can have a good crop from most African-derived products and vegetables. And this pea, we grow, and then it starts to bear here late June, mostly in July, and will continue to bear until frost. So I'll grow a row for the seed catalog, and then I'll grow a couple of rows for the seed catalog, and then I'll grow a row for fresh eating. And they're so prolific that I can do that and still have, quite, a large amount of food to be able to sell at my markets twice a week. But the ones, of course, for the seed catalog, we let them dry down on the plant.
Do you avoid picking the ones for the seed catalog?
I do. Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah, I do. Because we can't pick them and eat at the same time. So, of course, that depends. That depends on who we got working in the field. Sometimes you always have a person. And we have a youth program as well. So we work with young black high school youth, majority black high school youth. And so sometimes, we'll have them out in the field. There are junior farmers, and they might mess up and pick the wrong row. But, there's the crop is so forgiving. It's so abundantly prolific that we always end up having enough. And as that dries down, when they dry down, then we will sit together to clean the seed with the young people. Just as I did with my grandmother on the porch. Only when I was a kid, we were shelling fresh peas and then, putting them up in the freezer for later use. But we shell those dried beans of the crowder pea and of the purple hull pea, which we grow, at quite a distance from one another, so they don't cross, since they're liable to cross because they're relatives. And we'll sit around in a circle and we shell these. And oftentimes I will have the young people with me singing some of our traditional songs as we're shelling these peas, or we're telling stories, or just sort of shooting the breeze, wherever, we happen to be doing this. And we tend to do it, of course, in early fall, late summer, to get those ready. And it's a relatively easy seed cleaning process. That's an easy seed to keep. But I do find that, in terms of technical practices, that the process of shelling them in a group and doing it while singing our traditional songs or while telling stories, is one of the things that feels essential in seed keeping for that particular crop and for all those crops of the African diaspora that we grow. Because if there is a technical practice, it would be that we don't sort of absentmindedly shell them, and we don't put them through a machine. Though I do have a pea sheller, but we do this in community, and that's the way that it's done traditionally, and that's the way that we do it on our porch. Owen and I, with our 5-year-old, he has to shell peas in the summertime as well. And we do it that way, with stories, with song.
At what point do you harvest? And when you harvest, are you just picking pods, or do you pull plants, or is there anything you do between the harvest and the shelling?
No, well, I don't pull the whole plant, because like I said, it will continue to bear, all throughout the season. So we definitely pick. We wait till the seed pods are brittle. Of course, they have to be very brittle. They have to make a cracking sound, and of course they're beans, and so you do want to try to get them right at the right time. There is that tricky thing with beans that all beans and peas originally, I guess, or so we're told, their ancestors had a habit of sort of automatic dehission, where they would just sort of split open and explode, their seeds out into the area, and I guess we human beings over the centuries began to select for pods that did not open prematurely. And so the fascinating thing about these, so you do still, for instance, most other beans, I do think that it might be a little easier, particularly phaseolus beans, a little easier to sort of harvest them when they're dry and expect that they're not all popping open. But it's true, the Vigna tribe does seem to split if you don't get it right on time. And so, I'm sure it's a lot better than thousands of years ago, when our ancestral grandmothers were collecting them and had to pick them up off the ground. But still, you do have to get them, and we wait until they're very brittle and dry and make a crackling noise. And then we gather all of them at that point. Of course, the plant, they don't all dry down at the same time on the plant. So you will have on the same plant fresh peas and dried peas as well. And so it does take an experienced eye to recognize, that these are the peas to pick.
So you'll be picking multiple times through the end of the summer into the early fall, and cleaning shortly after the harvest, or do you kind of put them into a protected area until you have the moment to clean them?
Yeah, we do. So we do that. We'll clean them a few times over the season, but I do like to wait until we can get a good amount of them, so that we're not picking and shelling every day. But I could pick in the summertime, and certainly by August, mid-August, I could probably pick every 2 days, honestly. If I wanted to just going through, if you just say you have a 100-foot row, I could be picking every 2 days. Certainly every 3 days, I have to go through and look for them, and then so we keep them in a cool, dry and dark space until we have a good amount to to go ahead and start shelling.
And so, Owen, the crop that you chose to talk about for seed production is kukuza. Do you want to walk us through kukuza seed saving?
So kukuza is a bottle gourd. It's an African species, but it's been grown in southern Italy for probably 2,000 years, and it predates the zucchini, which is an American species. So I'm not totally sure how to say this species name. It's Lagenaria ciceraria, something like that. So again, the bottle gourd species, an African gourd. And they're eaten, they get very long. They can be maybe 3 feet long or longer. They are vining crop. They grow very tall vines, and they have these white lacy flowers, and then these very long light green gourds, very thin, long, light green gourds. And so, I try to grow my ancestral crops. I grow a lot of Southern Italian crops, and this is one of them. And so, we grow them on our fence line It seems like the deer don't really like to eat the leaves, so we grow them on the fence line. We do get some predation. Sometimes some animals will eat the bottoms off of them that are like towards the ground, off of the fruits. But mostly it works well on the fence line. And they make so many gourds, so many fruits. And, people will eat them when they're pretty young, maybe 12 inches long. And that's actually a very short one when they're still tender. I've even eaten like 2 feet long ones. And you just got to peel the skin off either way. But you have to let them get to their full length and let them start to brown. But you don't want them to actually be brown. You actually want their skin to just be like this waxy, hard, darker green, maybe with some splotching, but not actually dried out. At least that's what we've found. We harvest them at that point when maybe their stem is turning brown. Luckily, a lot of them are ready at the same time. We've kind of developed over the last couple of years our own method of processing them, which involves getting a huge tarp, laying them all out on the tarp, and we might do several dozen at a time of these giant gourds. And so one of my coworkers kind of made it almost like a tub by finding things to put under the edges of the tarp to kind of contain the seeds, and we just kind of jump on them. It's really fun. Like we might have 10 people that day because we have an apprenticeship program, volunteers, a bunch of coworkers. So we may have like 5 or 10 people in their boots just jumping on these gourds until they crack open and splatter their seeds everywhere.
Can I ask you, where, like in the gourd, so I'm not familiar with kukuzas, but in the gourd, where is the seed cavity as opposed to like if you think of a butternut, there's like a long fleshy part and then there's a seed on the bottom. How does that work with the kukuza?
There's seeds almost the entire length. It's not like a butternut where it's just right at the end. And so, there might be a little, like a foot or so up the top that doesn't have seeds, but probably like half to 2/3 of it is seeds. So it's pretty much lined with seeds. So we just jump on the whole thing, and we can maybe, if when the top part cracks off, you can just kind of toss it into the compost pile. But most of it has seeds. There'll be hundreds of seeds in each one, and they're slimy. Last maybe a year or two ago when we first grew it for seed, I was trying to crack them and then tear them apart with my hands, but the skin is actually really sharp. So I'd cut myself. It would be kind of painful and dangerous. And then I tried hitting them with 2x4s, but really the full weight of the body and lots of people jumping up and down seems to be the way that works for us now. I'm sure there's a machine that one could find that you could put them through, but it's actually really fun. I heard on your episode talking about using a shop vac to extract seeds. That might be something we try once we've smashed them all, because going through the tarp and trying to find all the gooey seeds and throw them into a bucket is very time consuming. But yeah, then what we'll do is we have this giant strainer. It's probably like 2 feet across. It came from a restaurant. And we throw all the seeds in there of any squash or cucurbit, and we spray them down to spray off some of the goop. And we have these screens that I got at a yard sale that were from an old chicken coop. I don't know what they like. I guess they were underneath the laying boxes or something. And they're wooden lined screens that we put all our cucurbits on to dry, so that there's like air coming from underneath as well. And in our basement at the farm that we rent, we have a dehumidifier, we have a fan going, and we have all these racks of seeds in that basement. And we give them 2 weeks of any seed, whether it started wet or dry. We give 2 weeks in an environment like that for them to dry down before we'll jar them up. So we keep them well labeled. We move them around so that they can dry quicker, like every few days or something like that.
When you gather the seed, is it as like slimy and like fibrous as like as a squash seed would be at that point?
I would say it's pretty slimy. It's not fibrous. The inside of the gourd is more spongy, but the seeds are pretty slimy. Maybe not quite as slimy as a cucurbita species, but still slimy.
And then do you use water to clean these seeds at that point?
We do. We spray a hose through that big strainer and to kind of wash some of that slime off.
I know some cucurbits can be really tricky to get clean, or it's just frustrating. Is it fairly, like, how would you rate it at that phase?
Well, at that phase, it's actually really easy. It's much harder to get the seeds out than any other squash I've grown or cucurbit. But once they're out, we just, like I said, we can just spray them down and put them on a drying rack. Oh, one thing that we do, and this is kind of neither here nor there, but we had an electric rabbit fence last year, and the kukuza gourds, the fruits would kind of hang down and touch the ground and touch the fence and get like short out our fence, and like it would burn them a little bit. And so we started shoving sticks in to kind of keep them off the fence. And I'll try to find ways to keep them out of reach of animals. But you know, they're a pretty sprawling plant with, you know, just gigantic fruits. And so it's an interesting challenge to kind of take care of them throughout the year. But they're wonderful.
So I have a couple questions I like to end each conversation with. And the first one is, what would you tell your younger seed saving selves?
My younger seed keeping self, I think I would say, I would get myself ready for seed keeping. It's something that it's a different kind of challenge. I mean, I've always known that I wanted to grow food. I've always known that I wanted, somehow to be involved in agriculture or at least botany. But I was not initially prepared, I think, for that delicate balance of being a market and production farmer as well as a seed keeper. And again, we do say seed keeping, and we say that very, intentionally, because we believe that, we're, of course, saving the seed, the biological material, but we're also saving and lifting up and placing, in the context of the seed, the stories, the lore, the ritual, the songs, all of that with the seed. And so I think I probably to my younger self would tell myself, hey, you have a important food culture here. You need to recognize it. And you need to start thinking about how you will manage this balance of growing food for market as well as for seed keeping, because I don't think I was initially prepared for it. And it certainly has taken some years to get into the groove where it is a normal thing now.
I would agree with that piece. I'm trying to think of who my younger seed keeping self was. My first time was with marigold seeds when I was a teenager. And I worked on a production farm in Connecticut in 2012 and did some seed keeping there. I think what I would want my younger self to know is just that, seed keeping is such an intimate relationship with the plants that we grow, and to just like really get excited for that intimacy and getting to know what those plants are like from seed to seed. You really pay attention to them as they flower and as they start to develop seeds, and you learn as much from them as you can from any other source. You can supplement that learning with books and conversations with people, but the plants tell you so much about when they're ready for their seed to be harvested and so on, and how they need to be treated to get to that point. And then of course the cultural piece is what really, for me, got me hooked. So I would tell my younger self to think about where these plants came from before they ended up in your garden, who cared for them for the last 10,000 years. What is their significance to other people? So I think those two things.
And so the next question is, what would you say to market growers, whether growing vegetables, herbs, or flowers? What would you say to them to inspire them to start saving seed?
Well, in keeping with our tradition and Truelove, I would, we're always encouraging people to dig into their own story. And so the very first thing I would say is, I would ask is, what are the foods and the crops that have been important to the survival of your ancestors and that contributed to your being here? And what are the ways that you think that you could come closest to honoring that, that story of your life and of your survival? So that's the first thing that I would ask people to do. Because then you place it within a deeper context, and a context that has something to do with your own story, and how that story is shared with so many other people. And that's a gift to the world. It's a gift to everybody, I think, particularly in this very multicultural, multi-ethnic society that is struggling since its inception with how to be a diverse nation, how to be a place where everyone's culture is not only valuable, but necessary, to this social experiment, that we call the U.S. And so that's the first thing. But then, sort of on a ground level, I think I would tell folks to start slow, and start by thinking about growing, maybe just one crop for seed keeping at first, and as you find ways to really, because I think isolation, sort of isolating the plants so that they don't cross is one of the, it was one of the hardest things for me as a market farmer, making sure that I'm growing, because we have limited space, particularly if you're growing in cities, you have limited space, and you're growing a whole lot of different crops. And a lot of them are related to one another, So I would tell folks first and foremost, sort of bone up on your education around what plant families sort of constitute, the nation of your garden. So that's the first thing. You need to know that this sweet pepper is related, because it's Capsicum annuum to this other sweet pepper, but is more distantly related, to maybe a pimento pepper, Capsicum chinensis, or frutescens, And so that's the other thing that I would say is sort of, really make sure that you have a deep understanding of plant families and sort of the genetic possibilities so start small, and work your way up.
I think that's great advice to end on. Is there anything else that you want to talk about, or I should ask you, or should have asked you while you're here?
Well, a couple things. One thing I'll say is that we kind of organically developed an apprenticeship program in our second year, in 2018, when people just kind of were following along with our work, were interested in cultural preservation and seed keeping, and asked to learn alongside of us. And so I think we're in our fifth or sixth year of having apprentices. Most people that work or have worked at Truelove Seeds as staff started as apprentices. It's been great. It's been a great way to train people in this work to the point where we can then hire them, but also many of our former apprentices have moved far and wide and are actually growers for our catalog. And that has been an awesome relationship as well. We have maybe 3 or 4 former apprentices now on their own farms growing for our catalog, including Amira Mitchell, who I mentioned, of Sista Seeds, who's I think growing almost 30 different seed crops for our catalog this year, all of the African diaspora. So the apprenticeship model has just been really awesome for us and for the people who've been involved. So that's one thing. The other that I'd mention is that this has always just been a wild idea, and it's kind of amazing to me that it's still happening and it's working and people are interested and we've been able to stay afloat. And we started this seed company without long-term land tenure. Someone let us use a half acre on her property where I had grown before. Someone bought that land. We eventually had to leave. We've had all these trials and tribulations in terms of finding land, and we pivoted last year from one potential property to having to grow at another friend's land temporarily. So we've been in like a 5-year land search, and it's very difficult in an urban place like Philadelphia especially with rising property values, to find a place that we can afford to buy, which doesn't seem likely, or rent that's not over an hour from here. So our biggest struggle right now is around land access. And we're talking to many people within Philadelphia and outside of Philadelphia. And I've probably visited, I'm just guessing, like 40 properties in the last 5 years, and we're still on the search. And so that's something that people may not think of or see as they follow along with our work, but having access to a long-term land tenure or lease or ownership is really the biggest struggle for us right now.
Well, I wish you luck on that on that quest, and I hope that there's exciting news sooner than later. How can people find out more about what you're doing? Because I know you're all doing a lot more than just what we've talked about.
People can check out our seed company, trueloveseeds.com. You can see what seeds we offer, but we also try to offer the stories of each seed and their descriptions, as well as the stories of the people who grew them for us, linked to those descriptions. And we have a podcast called Seeds and Their People. Yeah. And we've just started allocating time again after a long time away to, for various reasons, to editing again, putting out more episodes. So Chris and I host that together. And we have an Instagram, which the one that I use actively is @seedkeeping, as well as Facebook, Truelove Seeds. And how can people follow you, Chris?
I don't have any of that. Social media. That sounds like a joke the way you said that. Yeah, I don't do any social media besides YouTube, which I guess is the crudest form of social media. So you can look up the work of what's happening in Sankofa Farm by going to bartramsgarden.org/farm. So bartramsgarden.org/farm, and then you'll see the Sankofa Community Farm at Bartram's Garden website pop up. But other than that, I can be reached through the same avenues that have been mentioned.
We just launched a Patreon in the last couple of weeks. Thank you to my coworkers, one of whom is sitting across the room, Maeve. And we will be launching a fundraiser soon, hopefully. I was mentioning to Dan that, because we send such a huge portion of our income back to our growers, and we've also just raised all of our hourly wages to be earning living wages, we actually may have a funding gap this year. Since we're not a nonprofit, we are a seed company, but we kind of operate as if we were a nonprofit. We may be having to fill a gap this year. So it would really be helpful if people enjoy our podcast, if people enjoy following our work, if people have benefited from this episode, if they could check out our Patreon for Truelove Seeds.
Thank you so much, Chris and Owen, for being on the podcast, and I hope you have a fantastic season.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, God bless you and the work that you are doing.
And that's episode 10 of the Seed Growers Podcast. A huge thanks to Chris and Owen for being on the podcast. There are links to Truelove Seeds and Sankofa Community Farm at Bartram's Garden in the show notes. There is also a link to Truelove's Patreon page if you wish to support their work, and a link to the Seeds and Their People podcast. You can go and binge that podcast while you wait for more Seed Growers podcast episodes, because this is the last episode of season 1 of the Seed Growers podcast. Thank you so much for joining me in these conversations with seed growers. I really want to hear your thoughts about the show. Go and click on the survey link in the show notes and tell me your thoughts about the podcast and what you want for season 2. This feedback will help guide me through what to do next on the podcast. The Seed Growers Podcast is produced in part by No-Till Growers with the help of our sponsors, the Bauta Family Initiative on Canadian Seed Security and the Organic Seed Alliance. A huge thanks to Jackson Roulette and Jesse Frost of No-Till Growers for making this podcast happen. I've put together a bunch of seed growing resources on my blog. You can find them at seedgrowers.farm. If you haven't already subscribed to this episode, now's the time. That way, you'll know when new episodes come your way. Until then, happy farming.